You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 70 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. I said in yesterday's episode that the next show would be after Game 7 between the Warriors and Rockets unless something remarkable happened between the Cavs and Celtics. And it goes without saying that something very remarkable did happen. We all know the context of this game. We know the context of the series. Boston was undefeated at home. They're very well coached, and they're a very mentally tough team. They had to be to not allow doubts and excuses to creep in after the huge injuries that they suffered throughout the season. But we finally saw some mental toughness from Cleveland. I know that they had to beat Indiana in 7 games, but that Pacer team completely overachieved. Cleveland survived the Pacers, but they had to overcome the Celtics. And they overcame the best coach in basketball. They overcame the best young perimeter duo in basketball. They overcame a 2-0 deficit to start the series. And they overcame a Game 7 in the toughest environment to play in. You know, you can just ask Ben Simmons about that. So much will be said about LeBron in the coming days. And don't worry, I'll get to him shortly as well. But let's talk about his supporting cast for a second. Jeff Green, who replaced Kevin Love, had 19 points and 8 rebounds. Tristan Thompson was active and he had 10 points and 9 rebounds himself. J.R. Smith hit timely threes in the second half and finished with 12 points. But despite all their contributions in the box score, their impact on the defensive end was brilliant. The Celtics were held to 50 points in the final 3 quarters. And a big part of that was Cleveland's defense on the perimeter. The Celtics finished up with 7 for 39 from 3, and that includes a late garbage time 3. The Cavs just took the Celtics out of their offense, and a lot of the credit has to go to the supporting cast for that. Now notice I said a lot, but clearly not the majority. LeBron is magnificent. And before you go and call me a hater or that I'm flip-flopping, this is exactly what I predicted would happen in Game 7 in the previous show. I said that the role players would have to give them just enough help and LeBron would have to be great. And then I said that's exactly what I think would happen. And it did. So if anyone thinks that I'm jumping on his bandwagon, whatever. Because if I'm the focus of your attention right now after what we just saw, then I think your priorities might be a little bit messed up as a basketball fan. But getting back to his performance, and I'm not just talking about Game 7, his entire run throughout the playoffs, it was right there with some of the best runs to the finals that we've ever seen. It's there with Jordan in 97, it's there with Hakeem in 94 and 95, and of course Dirk in 2011, and of course you got to throw in Iverson in 2001 as well. For as long as basketball is relevant in society, people will remember it and they'll be talking about it. Now, I wouldn't call it career-defining, though, because the 2016 was that for him. That was, when we look at how good of a career LeBron has had, that was his defining moment. But this is his second most defining moment, and he posted 35 points, 15 rebounds, 9 assists, although we do have to say 8 turnovers as well. But maybe the most important stat of the night, 48 minutes. He played every second. Now, here is where the LeBron worshippers should probably turn off. But I do have to mention that as unbelievable of a run that he's had, we do need to point out the teams that he went through. The Pacers, as I mentioned before, were so overmatched that it wasn't funny. Oladipo had a great Game 1, but they extended the series with a few players having the games of their lives and great coaching. Next up was Toronto, who provided the sports world with the biggest catfish we've seen since Manti Te'o's girlfriend. And then after that it was Boston, who, admittedly, they had the best coach in basketball, but they were missing Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward. Now, let's compare that to some of the great playoff runs from the players that I mentioned before. We're going to start with Hakeem in 94. He went through the Portland Trail Blazers, who had Clyde Drexler, And let's keep in mind that they made the NBA Finals in 1992. Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns were next, and they made the NBA Finals just the year prior. And then you had Karl Malone and John Stockton and the Utah Jazz, and they made the finals in 97 and 98. Karl Malone would pick up a couple of MVP awards as well. Then in 95, they went through Malone and Stockton again in the first round, Barkley again in the second round. In the conference finals, they went up against the league MVP and David Robinson. They crushed him. In 1997, Jordan went through the Bullets with Webber, Strickland, and Howard. That's 2 All-Stars and the league leader in assists. Of course, the league leader being Rod Strickland, and the 2 All-Stars were Chris Webber and Juwan Howard. Then they went through the Hawks, who once again they had 2 All-Stars, Dikembe Mutombo and Christian Laettner. Plus, they also had Steve Smith and Mookie Blaylock. They were a pretty balanced team. Then finally, they toppled the Heat, and they had, once again, 2 All-Stars in Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway. And Tim Hardaway wasn't just an All-Star, he was All-NBA first team. Now let's move on to the run that Dirk Nowitzki had. First round was against LaMarcus Aldridge and Brandon Roy in the Portland Trail Blazers. Then in the second round, it was up against the 2-time defending champion Lakers, with Kobe, Pau Gasol, and Phil Jackson was still the coach. In the conference finals, was up against a young Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. And then finally, we're going to have a look at Allen Iverson. And the 76ers of 2001 went through the Pacers with Reggie Miller, Jalen Rose, and a young Jermaine O'Neal. The second round was up against the Toronto Raptors when Vince Carter was making an argument of being the best offensive player in all of basketball. He was dominant. Philly survived them in 7 games. And then they finally moved on to the conference finals up against the Milwaukee Bucks with Ray Allen, Glenn Robinson, and Sam Cassell. And they beat them in 7 games. So there's no question to me that LeBron had an easier field to dominate. So let's pump the brakes a little before we call it either his greatest accomplishment or the best individual run to the finals. But I will say this. You look at all those players and their runs, and outside of Iverson, all those runs ended in championships. And if LeBron wants this to be remembered, they have to claim the title. Otherwise, and I'll be the first to admit that this is brutal, it'll be an afterthought. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just think about the Utah Jazz of 1998. They went through 8 Hall of Fame players. Olajuwon, Drexler, Barkley, David Robinson, Tim Duncan, Shaq, and Kobe. Now, some of those guys were very young in their careers, like Kobe and Tim Duncan. Some guys were over the hill, like Drexler, who was in his final year, and also Charles Barkley. Regardless, still 8 Hall of Famers. And nobody, to this day, really brings up how good of a run that was by the Utah Jazz because they were unable to get over the hump of the Chicago Bulls. Now, if the Cavs do somehow overcome Houston or Golden State, then sure, it can be considered one of the greatest, if not the best, individual runs in playoff history. But it needs to be validated by conquering a great team. So, as I said before, I wasn't really planning on doing a podcast today, but that was an incredible performance. I wanted to get my thoughts out raw. There was nothing written down there. I don't even think I took a breath throughout the entire episode. We have another big Game 7 coming up. Obviously, that's tomorrow. And that might be coming out a day late. As I said, I've got a pretty big interview with the US consulate coming up. And we'll kind of decide my future. No nerves or anything, right? But after that, then we can go back into a schedule, and we'll not only be covering Game 7 between the Rockets and Warriors, we'll be looking ahead to the NBA Finals because we know Cleveland's going to be there once again, and also be answering some questions. So no questions will be answered in today's episode. I hope you enjoyed today's game. Keep the questions coming. I know I've got a lot to get through, but keep them coming. Keep the fresh ones coming through. And I hope you enjoy Game 7 between the Rockets and the Warriors. That should be an absolute battle and a classic, just like this was. Even though if you look at the score, you might think, oh, this is terrible. Look at the shooting percentages and numbers. This was great. This was a great moment for LeBron. And it was a good advertisement for basketball. The intensity that was on both sides of the ball. I mean, that was a brilliant Game 7. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I hope you guys enjoyed it too. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.